um, kick off. And
Morning to those on Zoom. Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to see. It's a nice turnout. I'm pushing for something like this in Stanmore. From a very sorry, not on a Tuesday. Well, even later perhaps. Then we should do a third minion. We should do more of a Hasidish minion, I think, in Stanmore. But so far, my pleas and beseeches have been met with thunderous silence. So I thought I'd share just one idea. I believe we have about a quarter of an hour. Is that accurate? Just one idea I'm again. It's a bit of plagiarism, but I think plagiarizing oneself is both legal or perhaps slightly narcissistic. But an idea that I'm working on with the community in Stanmore, which is taking perhaps a different approach and a different angle to look at the parashiyot, the Torah portions that we're currently reading, because we are reading it's a journey. The journey through the desert was not just as the age-old anti-Semitic joke went. Why did the Jews want the desert for 40 years? It's okay, you're being recorded and it's on Zoom because someone dropped a fiver. That was the anti-Semitic joke. Used to be that. With inflation, it's probably now £20. That was the joke. And yet we know internally within our community, it's no laughing matter. And the journey that our ancestors went through was one really of discovery of Hashem, discovery, I think, perhaps in some ways, more importantly, of themselves, of their role. Someone said to someone, in fact, one of our congregants asked me the other day of why there was so many problems in the desert, why we complained so many times. And we do like, let's be honest, as Jews, we do like a good kvetch every now and then. But why so often? Why was there so much trouble? And the point I made to them was one that I think I've picked up just from a casual study of history. We look through history and we see that there is a fundamental difference between being a rebel and being a leader. We see this throughout history, even in relatively modern times. You look at sort of the Arab Spring and the aftermath of that, where we think, well, this is a good cause, but then what replaces it is even worse. You look at Soviet Russia, the noble intentions that revolutionaries have, but the transition between being a rebel and revolting against something and then leading people to an actually a better future is far, far more difficult, and we sometimes underestimate it tragically to our demise. So just to share one idea that links perhaps Bashalach with Yitro, that we're now the sort of in between the two. And that is an idea that Rashi picks up on in the Shira. So I made my traditional Alan Shearer joke last week in Shul. Went down like a lead balloon. But you gotta get people. No. Someone came up to me afterwards and says, "How do you know so much about football, Rabbi?" And I said, "Look, I'm a lifelong Spurs fan, so I know about football and suffering." So those are my two areas. If I ever did mastermind, my two areas of expertise are those. We see in the Shira, in the Song of the Sea, really actually toward the beginning, that it's, as we know, it's the culmination of the redemption. It's the final piece in the puzzle. Just when Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, think we've left Pharaoh and his army behind, they turn around, they're at the sea, there's a dust cloud behind them, it's growing ever closer. They turn around to Moshe and they say, were there not enough graves? Were there enough cemeteries in Mitzrayim, in Egypt? You've brought us here to die in the desert. You've got to do something. So which Moshe does what is his want. He turns to Hashem and starts davening, which Hashem says, Matitzak Elai. Daber b'nei Yisrael v'Yisrael. Now is not the time to daven. Now is not the time to pray. Now is the time to move forward. Just move. Move, and you'll see what I've got up my sleeve. You'll see what I'm about to do. The sea splits, we walk through on dry land. The sea returns to its strength. It drowns the Egyptian army. And then sort of toward the beginning, as I said, of the Shira, we read this fascinating part where together, and again, Chazal, our sages, teach us, and I often point this out, that the Song of the Sea was one of the only times, perhaps in Jewish history, we've all agreed with each other. There is a midrash that says, quite cryptically, that almost through nevuah, through prophecy, every single person there, it's actually a machloket, it's a dispute in the Gemara about who composed the Shira. Was it something that came to Moshe through prophecy? He said it, and then the Jewish people repeated it after him, stanza by stanza? Or was there perhaps some divine inspiration that erupted in everyone, and simultaneously we all agreed on the same words, same chorus, same stanza, And I think if we tried this nowadays, we'd probably need a number of committee meetings first, followed by a sponsorship, perhaps of the song, and then a plaque afterwards. But we'd get there eventually. And the Jewish people say the word Zeh Keli Va'anvehu, which means what in English? It's quite tricky to translate, actually. Zeh Keli Va'anvehu. Zeh means this is my God, Va'anvehu. Again, the Gemara is not clear on how we would translate that word, but I think Art Scroll. Let's look at the Art Scroll translation that says, "Oh, okay, that's it's gone in depth with that, but it's I will glorify him, beautify him." So Zeh Keli Va'anvehu, and Rashi says something fascinating here. That's based on the Midrash in the Mechilta. In fact, Rashi paraphrases it; doesn't quote it exactly. He says that even a lowly maidservant, even the humblest, lowliest person standing there at the sea who just seen Hashem's salvation, saw with clarity that even the greatest of our prophets didn't have. In fact, the Mechilta brings the prophet Yechezkel, Ezekiel, which is a story for another time. Rashi says simply a generalization, Nevi'im, the prophets. And the Mechilta explains, as it were, that as we stood together at the sea, it's as if the heavens opened. And Zeh, Keli Va'anvehu, the Midrash says, Marehu Ba'etzpah. It's as if they pointed at Hashem. So clear was his existence to them, so clear was his salvation to them, that it was as if they were able to point him out and locate him. And this, says Rashi, quoting the Mechilta in the Midrash, was a greater level of prophecy, of prophetic insight, of clarity, of understanding than even the greatest of our prophets. That's what he says. That's Zeh Keli Va'anvehu. And that begs the question, because if you just turn the page, and I've put a marker down, that's on page 376. We turn to page 382, just it's in the Hebrew 3 pages later. What are we doing already? We are complaining. We are, as I said before, we're having a good fetch. And barely a few months later, we are dancing around golden calf. So was there clarity and appreciation, or was there not? Well, which was it? Bit of a paradox, isn't it? If our ancestors saw what even Ezekiel and the greatest prophets didn't see, how did A lead to B? What happened? What went wrong? An excellent point. Something about the complaints, and perhaps we'll look into this briefly with the time that we have. The nature of the complaints is really important, of what they're actually kvetching about. I shouldn't say kvetching, it's disrespectful to our ancestors. We kvetch, I kvetch. What they were doing was exploration. They were discovering. This is a new journey. As I said at the beginning, this is a new journey. We've just met, literally just met a year ago, this Hashem. We're still discovering our relationship with him and what that looks like. But within that, there is a fundamental piece that leads to this pointing out of Hashem that can lead to that going wrong. And there's a spark of that in all of us as well. So it's important to identify what it is so that we could know how to fix it, how to preempt it. Any other ideas?
Imagine. More
To satisfy us.
what? Nothing would be taken.
Someone once said to me that if it hadn't been the Jews who'd left Egypt, but let's say Victorian Britons, let's say the Victorian Englishmen had left, they would have formed an orderly queue and it would have taken them more than 40 years to get across the desert. That's for sure. So they would have built a railway. Yeah. First, it would have taken, which they did, they would have taken all the Egyptian treasures back to London. You know, and then claimed, oh, we were given these. They were gifted to us. It's a fascinating point. Maybe our standards were simply higher. I asked this question to one of my Rabbi, one of my teachers in yeshiva many, many years ago, of just what went wrong. And his answer to me, as in true typical Jewish fashion, he answered questions with other questions. So when I asked him this question, was what went wrong? 3 pages later, we're already complaining. Literally, what went wrong? He said to me a fascinating thing, and I'll give you a clue with this. He said there is a problem, there is a fundamental, it looks like a flaw, but the Mechilta, the Midrash, has chosen its lashon, its expression very carefully. And I'll say it to you again in English. Spot the problem. And he said, through that problem, you'll understand what was going wrong. Say it again in English. This is my God, and I'll beautify and glorify him. Says the Mechilta, even the lowliest maidservant and servant, standing there at the sea, saw things with clarity that even our greatest prophets didn't see. I paraphrased it, but that is roughly, not verbatim, that's what it says. Say it again, spot the problem. Even the lowliest maidservant at the sea saw what the greatest prophets did not. I had the same face as everyone here when he said that. I was like, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? The clue is in the beginning of the sentence. It's the same problem. The understanding of those miracles is such that how can you complain to the same question for later? There's three pages later. The problem is in, and you'll spot it, the lowliest maidservant saw at the sea what the greatest prophets didn't. The clue is in the very beginning of that sentence. It took me like a week. And he wouldn't help me either. It took me a week to figure this out, and it's such a powerful point. The clue is the word maidservant and servant. I threw in the word lowliest just to give you more of a hint. Opposite. No, this line. When the penny dropped, I came back to him. He said, "You got it, haven't you?" I said, "Yeah, I think I do." I said, "Why is the Mechilta describing us as if we are still servants? We're not servants anymore. This is the whole point." Pause that. That's exactly where we're headed. I said, we're not servants anymore. So why is the Midrash calling us servants? Say the simplest person, simplest man or woman. We're free men, free women. We're not made servants. But that's the whole thing. We've left that behind. That's the whole point of the Exodus, was to give us freedom. So why is the Mechilta describing us in such terms? And this time, instead of answering my question with another question, he actually answered it because I'd done the legwork. And he said, you see this with the spies, you see it with the Meraglim, where they say, I think is the expression. We were in our own eyes like just insects and locusts. He says the problem is fundamentally, it's one thing to have faith and clarity about Hashem. It's another thing entirely to have faith and clarity about ourselves. And if our ancestors, and this is an excellent point, what our ancestors were struggling with, the Sephoraner makes this point in the book of Bamidbar. He says this is the entire 40-year-long challenge, is can we reconcile the idea there is a creator of all existence who wants a close relationship with each and every one of us? Now, we take that for granted. If you said that in the ancient world, a world where the gods wanted nothing to do with peasants like us, and we weren't worthy of the gods' love and the gods' affection, if you'd said that to our ancestors in ancient times, we would have thought you were mad. And so standing at the sea, yes, we saw tremendous things with tremendous clarity, but we saw them through the eyes of who? A lowly servant. And what Hashem wanted from us is to see them through the eyes of what we described as later on, Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Look again with a different pair of eyes, a pair of eyes that believes in ourselves as much as we believe in Hashem. And this was the challenge, one of the challenges that our ancestors hit the nail on the head, that our ancestors were going through. And the Sephoraner, in fact, says that generation never got past that challenge, which meant their children who were actually born in freedom, they were the generation who inherited the land of Israel and became a nation. So there we go. One little idea linking our parsha together. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you so much. Has anyone got any further questions?
Complaints?
Comments? No, okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning. That was well worth the trip from Stanmore. Benefit.
Oh, no, I live in Israel.
You live in Israel, right?
Well, much
Yeah,
worse
no,
than
yeah.
last
I'll say goodbye to those on Zoom. We'll see you all next week, and I will do the